bad currency or bad money loses all of its value over the course of a few years. In Venezuela, you lose all your value in 36 months. The Argentine peso was 1 to the dollar 21 years ago. If you had $1 million 21 years ago, the Argentine peso right now is about 480 to the dollar. So that's not a 99% loss. That's a 99.8% loss, right?
In how many years?
21 years. Okay, so what I'm saying is you don't have money if you have weak currency. Now let's take strong currency. Well, the strongest currency in the world is the dollar. That's not money. You're losing 99% of your wealth over the course of 90 years in the US dollar. Maybe more. The US dollar, the only difference between the US dollar and the peso is whereas it takes 20 years to lose your family's fortune in the peso, it takes about 90 years to lose your family's fortune in the dollar. 13-year-old girl says to Warren Buffett, I'm really worried about the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. We're printing lots and lots of dollars, and if we're not the reserve currency, the value of the dollar is going to collapse. We're going to have hyperinflation. What should I do, Mr. Buffett? And so you watch Warren Buffett answer the question, and his answer is,
Michael Saylor, in a recent interview, shares his major concerns about the global economy and calls the US dollar and other global currencies worthless, and says that Bitcoin is the only asset that's worth holding in the long term. Weak currencies like Argentine pesos, Venezuelan Bolivars, and Zimbabwe dollars lose their value rapidly, causing significant wealth erosion. Michael Saylor, a prominent figure in Bitcoin adoption, emphasizes the unparalleled potential of Bitcoin as the strongest store of value. Saylor criticizes traditional banking systems, highlighting their risky investments and the potential crisis faced by small banks. He advocates for Bitcoin as a secure alternative to traditional banks. Saylor also calls out Warren Buffett for not knowing how to answer a 13-year-old girl for a simple question about the economy.
Money is a store of value, and there are multiple monies, and they're not created equal. So let me give you the world's worst money. The worst money in the world is like Argentine pesos or Venezuelan Bolivars or Zimbabwe dollars or Nigerian naira. Weak money. The official inflation rate in Argentina is 105%. But that's the official rate, which is that understates it. The actual inflation rate would be higher. And if the inflation rate is running 100%, that means your money is losing half of its value every 12 months. That means that within 10 years, you have nothing. My house in Miami Beach was $100,000 in 1930. It was appraised at $46 million a few years ago. Do the calculation. It's on a path to be worth $100 million, which means that the US dollar will have lost 99.9% of its value over 100 years. Warren Buffett knows this. Charlie Munger knows this. Basically, the bottom line there is your money in the bank isn't money. Okay, so the answer is you shouldn't have any money in a bank, right? You're basically losing 7% of all your wealth every year in a good year. If it's the dollar, you're losing 15% of your wealth in a not good year. If it's the dollar, you're absolutely losing all your money over the course of a decade. So that's kind of weak money. Awful money is developing world money, the Lebanese pound. The Lebanese pound got devalued. I mean, you would have lost all your money in 5 years if you had the pound. The strongest money, decent money, okay money was gold, but not great. The strongest money in the world is Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is absolutely capped at 21 million. It is global money. You could take $1 billion of Bitcoin across a border. You can transfer it to a counterparty, and no government can interdict that, and nobody can inflate that. And so my answer there would be, you can't trust any bank. You certainly can't trust a bank in Lebanon. Read about Lebanese banks. You can't trust that. You know, Bitcoin is a bank in cyberspace run by incorruptible software. It's going to keep your money. If you are incompetent, then you're going to suffer the consequences. But let's think about what what banking executives in the U.S. do. The U.S. banking system is the best in the world. Here's what they do. You put $100 billion into the bank. They have the deposits. They turn around. The Federal Reserve interest rate, short-term rate, was 0. And these guys went and invested $100 billion of those deposits in mid-dated, long-dated sovereign debt that was yielding 1.8% interest. The Federal Reserve took the interest. By the way, would you loan me money for 30 years at 3% interest rate? Like, can you imagine that? If the inflation rate was 8 or 10%, would you loan money out at 3% interest rate for the rest of your life?
Not in a million years.
Okay, that's what the banking executives in the U.S. did. At the point when the
You're talking about Silicon Valley Bank.
All of them, right? Pretty much.
All these guys.
Not just the ones that went bankrupt, right? There's a host of banks. I think they had, what was it, like $800 billion of unrealized losses or something. A host of banks went, and anybody that bought mid-dated or long-dated bonds at the bottom of the market when interest rates were 0, they were loaning out money forever at 2% interest or 3% interest or 1.5% interest. And as soon as you redeem, what happened, of course, is the Fed raised interest rates from 25 basis points. Actually, the rates went from 0 to 500 basis points in 12 months. That's the sharpest increase in interest rates in memory. That in itself is, it's just horrific, terrifying to think that any public servant would do that. But it's equally terrifying to think that if I was your money manager and if you had given me all your money when interest rates were 0, and I said, well, I guess interest rates will stay 0 for the next 30 years, and so I'm going to loan it out as a bond and lock in a price of 2%, you would have thought I was crazy. No, there is no individual, no corporation, no rational corporation, no economic actor that would loan money forever for 3% interest when inflation is running double or triple that. So the question is, who would? And the answer is a bureaucrat, either a governmental bureaucrat, someone that is coerced by regulatory policy where they're forced to. For example, a bank can't buy Bitcoin, but a bank is almost obligated to buy treasuries. Right? So the politicians create a set of rules that strongly encourage you to do certain things and strongly discourage you to do other things. And generally, they encourage you to do the thing which is probably least economically viable. But there are probably local organizations and banks in foreign countries that own their own local currency, right? Like, would you buy an African currency with an inflation rate of 200% a year? No, but people do. Why? Because the government controls or owns the entity, and so they force them. What I think happens to the banking system is all of the regional banks, the small, mid-sized banks are at a massive disadvantage right now because the government is showing that they're not going to bail out those equity holders. So there's a migration of deposits from the small banks to the big banks. I think the JP Morgans, the Bank of Americas, the mega banks will continue. They'll be just fine. They'll be supported by the government. The small banks are going to struggle, and that's what you see going on right now. If you're a depositor, you'll probably get bailed out by the government. If you're a bondholder in the bank or an equity holder of the bank, you won't get bailed out, right? And so there's a crisis for investors. Whereas everybody that's a depositor doesn't want to sit around and take the risk, right? Who wants any anxiety? So I think that to the extent that you rely on banks, clearly the world is waking up, and the U.S. is waking up, and they're thinking, I want to be with big banks. I wouldn't have my money in a bank anywhere outside the U.S. in a weak country, right? You need to be in a rich, strong country with a rich, strong bank. With regard to what individuals should do, I think the logical answer is For expenses, if you have expenses in the next 3 months, you have your expenses in the local currency, which is the peso, the naira, the whatever, because it's legally obligated for you to pay in the local currency. For the next 3 years of expenses, or 1 to 3 years of expenses, you put your wealth in the strongest world currency in the world. That's the dollar right now, but you make sure that you have that currency either self-custodied or you have it in a bank that you trust. That's hard. If you can't find a bank, if you were in Lebanon right now...
Can we trust you, bank?
If you were in Lebanon right now, you wouldn't put your money in any bank. You would actually put it on the Bitcoin blockchain. For any amount of money you want to keep the rest of your life, if you want to give it to your kids, if you want to actually retire on it, anything that's investable asset, you would put it in Bitcoin. You would put it in the strongest possible world currency, the global money. And that's Bitcoin. You're not going to get rich investing in dollars. And you'll lose all your money if your dollars are in a weak bank. And if your dollars in a strong bank, you'll just get poor slowly. And you're going to get poor. You're going to get poor rapidly if your money is in not the dollar, but a weaker currency. And you're going to get completely bankrupt if you trust a weak bank. And so MicroStrategy, by the way, we had like $90 million. We had $4+ billion worth of Bitcoin. So go figure, right? 98% of our assets are actually in the strong money. 2% is in the world's strongest currency in a good bank, in one of the big 4 banks, right? And that's about as much exposure as I want to a currency.
On top of being one of the biggest believers in Bitcoin, Michael Saylor doesn't just talk. He did something no company manager has ever done before, which is putting 98% of his company assets MicroStrategy into Bitcoin. The total value of the holding is close to $5 billion. This is how big Saylor believes that currently the future of money is Bitcoin. Not only that, he comments on a recent interview from a well-known investor.
And someone says, okay, well, here's a bank in cyberspace and an asset that no one can meddle with and no one can corrupt or tamper with. You think, well, tell me more about that. But if you're a wealthy American, if you're Warren Buffett, you know, we have a very famous example, a video that's going viral on Twitter. 13-year-old girl says to Warren Buffett, I'm really worried about the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world. We're printing lots and lots of dollars. And if we're not the reserve currency, the value of the dollar is going to collapse. We're going to have hyperinflation. What should I do, Mr. Buffett? You know, and I wouldn't normally criticize, you know, a respected, successful business person of his age. But he and Charlie Munger did choose to go up on stage and answer questions and give financial guidance and advice and investment advice, and they are looked up to. And so you watch Warren Buffett answer the question, and his answer is, well, yeah, I mean, I guess the Fed inflated the money, but they needed to. And, you know, it's really difficult, you know, and politics have a difficult problem. And yeah, you're right, it is a problem. And Munger will say, you know, the dollar's going to zero. It's going to zero. They know it's a problem. And then he kind of meanders through it with an end advice, which is, well, you know, I don't know, but, you know, America's a great country. Don't bet against America. But the blood-curdling, terrifying, you know, depressing, you know, takeaway from the clip is the 13-year-old girl knows what the problem is. The country's full of people that can articulate the problem and write 1,000-page books on the problem. If you're rich in America, you don't have the answer because you're too comfortable, right? And so what you've got is a bunch of mega billionaires that are very successful in America, but they don't have an answer or solution to the 13-year-old girl. The solution to the question was Bitcoin, right? And Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger can't allow themselves to understand that because they're so successful, they don't need to open their mind to and embrace a new idea. If Warren Buffett woke up tomorrow and his bank seized all of his assets and they were devalued to zero, and he was a pauper, and his neighbor, the Uber driver, was walking around with $100,000 worth of Bitcoin on a hardware wallet, Warren would say, "What is that again? Explain that to me."
Yeah.
What do you mean? My government, my bank can't steal all my money? That's a pretty good idea, right? And so I think that when you're a refugee from fleeing Iraq or you're crossing the border, and and when you try to go through an airport and a hostile regime steals all your money and seizes all your gold, when you have to flee your 1,000-acre or 10,000-acre farm in Africa because a hostile regime decided it was illegal for people like you to own land, when that happens, you become a believer in a non-sovereign store of value crypto asset network, which is what Bitcoin is. The people that came to this country, the Huguenots, the settlers, the colonists, I think they understood it. I mean, they had all their property seized from them from wherever they came from. And their idea was, here's a place where I can own something and people might not steal it from me. As soon as they got here, people started trying to steal it from them again, right? That's the human condition.
Just slower.
Just slower. But that's why they kept going west. It's like, I got to go west where there's no politicians to steal it from me, right? And that's a pretty powerful driver. So I think that the conclusion is people that are comfortable, they're fat, dumb, and happy in the United States are going to continue to reject new ideas like crypto assets, like Bitcoin, because they don't have to. If I don't have to embrace a new idea, when I get to a certain age, I won't. And that is as old as the Thomas Kuhn's structure of scientific revolution. He said, paradigm shifts only get embraced in times of war or when the old guard dies. If you want to introduce a new idea, you need a war. Wars kind of work because if we're fighting a war and I introduce an airplane and I drop a nuclear bomb on your head, then you stop rejecting air power and you stop rejecting atomic weapons. You embrace the reality that, yeah, they do work and maybe you need to figure it out.
Saylor says the solution to inflation is investing in Bitcoin. That's a really quick conclusion to everything he said in this video. Beside that, if you enjoyed watching, make sure to click on the like button.